Good afternoon and welcome to a very special session at the London Games Festival. It's day 4 of the London Games Festival and we've had hundreds of people already logging on to see new games, watch our showcase of new releases, and also tune in for meetings on our business platform. You might be watching this on YouTube or you might be watching this over on that platform. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a really exciting speaker joining us. I'll be joined by the CEO of CCP Games, Hilmar Pétursson, to talk about the Metaverse with the question, the Metaverse is coming, are you ready? The Metaverse, if you've heard of it, is a curious phrase that doesn't have much of a definition. And I'm delighted to have Hilmar here to help me understand and you what that means and what it means to the rest of us. Please welcome Hilmar. Hilmar, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, hi Michael. Great to be here.
It's brilliant to have you here at the London Games Festival. And Hilmar, I should add, is coming to us live from London. We've got London in our veins. And what I'd love to know, first of all, is just for the audience watching, tell us who you are and what CCP Games is.
Yeah, so I'm Hilmar Pétursson. I'm the CEO of CCP Games. We're a company founded in '97 and are mostly known for our game EVE Online that came out in 2003 and has been since then broken all our expectations of what greatness could be like and far exceeded that. But my career actually starts a little earlier. I started working for a VRML company in Iceland back in '96. And then there we were concretely going to make the Metaverse out of VRML, which stands for Virtual Reality Modeling Language. And that company was actually founded in Iceland in '92 with that mission, probably 50 years ahead of its time. And to give you a kind of a reference, then back in those days, Iceland, the country, was connected to the internet with a modem. So if you showed up to work too early, you had to wait while the country dialed into the internet. So, and there we sat on this volcanic rock and setting out to make the Metaverse.
Right. Okay. So that makes, by my calculation, EVE Online is about 18 years old.
Yes.
And as you were saying, your career has touched on online worlds, Metaverse style products. I mean, let's talk a bit about EVE Online before we duck into the big conversation. Like, how has that game changed over time? 18 years. That makes it must be one of the longest running open franchises in the industry.
Yes, I mean, we're definitely up there with a few. I'm very proud to be in that group. So, I mean, we start making EVE Online. Like I said, the company is founded '97. It starts in earnest, sort of late '99, when we had raised some money. We have actually the company starts by publishing a board game made out of paper and like for a family board game, and had a huge market penetration in Iceland, like 10,000 copies sold to 80,000 homes, and that was kind of a seed capital for the company, and also just kind of proving we could make something. So in '99 it starts in earnest, and then very much inspired by Ultima Online, multi-user dungeons, MUDs, text-based sort of graphical adventures on mostly Linux computers in universities. And we picked space because space is mostly just empty, so you don't have to make grass and trees and things like that. You need a space station, planet, and a nebula and a spaceship. And we had this wild idea of having everyone play on the same server, which was quite unusual at the time. Mostly games were in different copies of themselves called shards, pioneered by Ultima Online. Very big backstory why that is the case with Ultima, actually quite related to metaverses, how the shards in Ultima are a broken crystal from some wizard and whatnot. But we wanted everyone to play together, and we had this sort of theories that would be better due to the network effect of having everyone being able to affect each other. Mm-hmm. And we had these kind of wild theories that the game would develop a very strong community that would carry it on for a very long time. Very long time for us was 5 years. Our wildest ambitions was to have EVE Online go on for 5 years. And here we are 18 years later. Obviously, we're not great predictors of that, but that is mostly due to this network effect. Mm-hmm. As soon as we release the game, that becomes a lot stronger than we ever anticipated. and the engagement from players, how long people stay with the game and the community has far exceeded all our wildest dreams. We have people that have played every month since it came out 18 years ago. Many people have subscribed to the game all the way through. So there are thousands of people that have been with us on this journey ever since the beginning.
Wow. So, you know, in a sort of summary to, as we talk about the metaverse more, CCP built a universe 18 years ago, and it's full of people, and it's one single place, and they're all there. And and with that in mind, I was wanted to ask you about some of the initiatives that have gone on in that world, so we can add some context to this debate around what the metaverse is and how we and what the industry is doing about it, and are people building them. And tell me about Project Discovery and some of the citizen science projects that have been going on. Some of them have been recent, from what I know. But yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah. So in EVE Online, then people are contributing a lot of creativity and problem solving. Mostly that happens through the gameplay of the game and the social dimension. People are creating companies. They're creating a family of companies called alliances. Some of the largest alliances are tens of thousands of people. They're run by executive teams. They have HR departments and IT departments and God knows what. And this is no joke. There's literally HR processes in the biggest alliances, which are codified into all sorts of security mechanisms and Discord or Mumble servers and whatnot. And we wanted to see if there was a way to kind of harness this immense creativity from the player base into something that could solve real life science problems. And we started with protein analysis. Protein folding is a very complicated process, which takes a lot of computing power, but humans are actually quite good at it, just doing kind of approximate pattern matching. And we did a pretty successful project of that. Then we extended that into exoplanet research, where we took data from telescopes around the Earth and had EVE players inside EVE Online, the space game, searching for exoplanets in our own neighborhood. And and that received tremendous engagement. We finished all the work way ahead of schedule, which is always what happens with EVE players. You think you have enough, but they finished in a few weeks what should have lasted for years. They found defects in the pattern matching algorithms. They've contributed materially to our understanding of the universe around us, which we then have fantasies about bringing more into EVE Online. The astrophysics of EVE Online were set in motion 20 years ago, and since then we know a lot more about the space around us, and thanks to EVE players, even more. So this is all kind of a bit sort of self-referential, and in a way pretty meta when you think about it.
Yeah, very. I mean, thousands of people passionate about space in the universe, but helping bring real world space information in and then back out again. I mean, yes. we will get to more of that, but that's a testament to that really engaged fan base, that audience, right? I don't want to say it's more than a fan base.
Yes, fan base doesn't really cover it. This to me have always felt a lot more like citizens in a country. EVE Online in many ways feels a lot more like a country or a city than it does a computer game or players being fans of a computer games. The players that play EVE Online, they are really setting the agenda for the game. They are operating the narrative a lot more than us. We are, as we call ourselves, the janitors of the universe. We make sure the lights are running and things like that. But the adventure comes from the players.
And so on that point, I wanted to pick up. I think this what I think is a really interesting point about the metaverse discussion is the touch point of a virtual world with a real one, right? So the EVE players, we've established they're really passionate, but I was reading something last year about the EVE effect. I remember actually you telling me about it at the CCP offices before the last London Games Festival, about what you knew about those players and the things they had done to show their commitment to each other in the physical world, like go to each other's weddings, or I'm probably paraphrasing, but it was about how committed they are to each other. So can you tell us about that and what you learned?
Yeah, so this concept we call the Eve effect is something we started researching in earnest sort of 3 years ago. And we, ever since the get-go, like I said in the beginning, we thought people are going to join for the graphics and stay for the community. It was kind of a rough business thesis. And we knew EVE Online's longevity and retention power comes from the community. But we wanted to break it down more so that we could make it more actionable for developers working on the game. And we did a big research project which involved surveys, talking to players, thousands of interviews, which we consolidated into a picture that became quite clear. And is that it's really friendships inside the game on a person-to-person basis that create the fabric that is the community. And we went into research like how do friendship get formed, and we learned that it's actually a 4-component formula. It involves proximity, duration, frequency, and intensity. And that's actually where EVE Online excel. There's a lot of intensity in the game. There's a harsh death penalty. The game requires cooperation to succeed. Cooperation requires trust. Trust is broken, then there are real consequences. So the game manufactures new friendships, not only friends that exist in the real world come together to play the game. It forges new friendships. And I say forging because forging is really the word that applies to EVE. Because of all the shenanigans that goes on in EVE Online, it really means something to have a friend you trust over many years or decades in EVE. And this really is the power of the longevity. It's individual friendships that are formed, which then create this mess that manifests into the political landscape of the game.
Yeah.
And that was one aspect of it. And then EVE is not a simple game at all. It might be the most complicated game ever made. And we have often kind of struggled with that. Is that a good or a bad thing? It's certainly a bad thing when you start playing it. But its complexity and how much you have to problem solve and invent strategies to cope with the complexity, it gives people very valuable skills, which are very valuable to companies. So a lot of EVE players have played EVE Online for many years and then went and founded their own companies in reality. Wow. Because they're basically running companies. You're basically running a company when you're at a certain tier of playing in EVE Online. Like I said, with an HR department, IT team, sales team, marketing, strategic analysis, military arm, God knows what. It's a lot of human drama that is involved in running that. CCP is a pretty small company in the context of what EVE players are doing. I have a pretty insignificant job. Compared to that, there are like 300 people that work at CCP, compares nothing to the tens of thousands of people that work for some of the major alliances. So a lot of the people that have gone and founded their own companies, they attribute their success with that back to EVE Online. EVE Online giving them real skills from playing the game, they could benefit them in reality. And out of this, we came with this kind of framing, which is the EVE effect. EVE Online gives you friends and skills. And we have been kind of developing this on as we progress with the development of the game to enhance these attributes. Where we're actually working quite a bit in getting EVE Online to be a little simpler in the beginning, because it's like putting kindergarten children to an MBA program, and maybe the ramp could be a little easier. But then on the other end, actually make it even harder. And make no excuses about that the game is, when you've played it for years, it continues to grow with you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with a game that's 18 years young, and like this crucible of challenge creates all of this real world stuff going on, right? So it's a very, really interesting point to make. Before we have before we even mention the M word, that there's so much of that people transfer from digital worlds into the real world for, whether it's their career or their well-being, and obviously Eve touched on a lot of these. So I mean, it's absolutely fascinating, and I think that's why you're the person to ask about this word metaverse, which, you know, some people will be familiar with, and a lot of us in the sector, in the games industry, and will have seen commentators talk more about it in the last few months and years. And obviously, it was popularized by Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash. But it's, you know, we as a games industry started talking about this a lot. So let's kind of talk about this and define it, because I think a lot of people, I don't know if you agree, Hilmar, a lot of people don't really know what the definition is, right?
No, I think the definition is pretty open. If you ask different people what they define as the metaverse, you get very different answers. And given it's not the first time somebody asked me about this, then I've had some time to break it down. And it really it just lies in the words meta and verse. So a metaverse is something that extend beyond a world, like a verse is a form of a world, and a meta is something beyond that. And the way I think about it is that the meta happens where you have something that encompasses more than one world. And if you go back to what we were talking about with Project Discovery, when you are playing a space game, EVE Online, and you're searching for exoplanets in reality at the same time, that is a very meta activity. You're inside the space game, looking at space data from another world. So you're kind of live in the intersection of two worlds, the space around us and the space of the fiction of EVE Online. And the metaverse is like a little dome about like around those two things. And then you could think about like a lot of this element with the friendship machine we were talking about earlier. People coming to like a fan fest in Iceland to meet their friends. That is a very meta activity. It's obviously not the game. People are there because of the game, but they're doing it in a different reality than the game. So the game has extended beyond just what's happening on the screen. It's impacting people's lives on this planet, not just their EVE lives on another planet. And you can usually, where something stops being a virtual world is when it starts to reach beyond its just its own existence on a screen on a computer. So you can look at all these kind of activities around games a little bit in that context. If you're in an esports team in a MOBA game, that is a pretty meta activity. You're competing in a sport on planet Earth, in a fiction of a game. Again, you have created a meta out of that. So that's at least how I think about it. Like, why is EVE Online a metaverse? Well, because it has tremendous impact on planet Earth, not just its own persistent state as governed by the servers of EVE Online.
Yeah. Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, but CCP has kind of had experiments in building metaverse style, not just EVE, you know, like ways to transfer between that existing EVE world before, right? You know, you had an FPS game, and there's been a VR game. You know, give me kind of a summary of what those experiences were for CCP.
Yeah, so EVE Online already has a ton of gameplay in it. Like the ways you can play EVE Online are like, there are thousands of ways, literally thousands of ways you can play EVE Online. There's so much there to do, and you can carve your own sort of experience out of the endless opportunity space. But we wanted to create easier on-ramps into that by making different games that would plug into the meta of EVE Online in some way. But they would be more to the point and simpler in terms of actual gameplay mechanics. But they will still derive their differentiation from being a part of the metaverse that EVE Online has created. And Dust 514 is probably the best example of that. We released that game in 2013 on the PlayStation 3. And it had moderate success on the PlayStation 3, like 8 million people played it. Not a shabby thing at all.
Not to be snipped at.
Yeah, but the PlayStation 3 was kind of at the end of its life cycle. We had planned to release the game earlier, but as often happens, it took longer than we expected, and it was a huge game, and we couldn't really take it further on the PlayStation 3, so we stopped that development. We are actually still exploring the idea. We have a studio here in London, which is doing something in this kind of territory, because we saw there was tremendous excitement for the vision of the game and this idea of playing a different gameplay style of game, but still being a part of the universe of Eve. Then we did a few virtual reality games, and those are still running, even if we are not actively developing them, because the VR market still has ways to go for it to be a robust commercial environment to do serious investment in. But the Valkyrie, Spark, Gunjack 1 and 2 are still all going and enjoy very passionate communities. So we have been kind of exploring this idea on how to have various games coexisting in then an even bigger meta concept where you have multiple games existing together and then touching people's lives on planet Earth at the same time. And that is something we're very stubborn people. We're not giving up on. But we have learned a lot. What is important, what is not important in doing those things. And the most important lesson is that for any game you add into a mix like that, the game has to be good on its own. It cannot lean on the meta aspects too much. So that is very much the focus we are bringing into our endeavors going forward.
Interesting, and I'm delighted to hear that new experiment's being made in London. Just selfishly, as part of the London Games Festival. Have you, but can you tell us anything about that project in any sense, in terms of you said you'd learned things from those other games, and you must have seen the other products, the other games out there, things like Fortnite or Roblox, that have kind of now lent into saying we are a metaverse, and they're incredibly popular, massive audiences, very young audiences. So have you looked at any of those things, and is that informing what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what is interesting about Roblox and Fortnite are the scale they were able to take it to. I mean, these games exist at an enormous scale, and they're very broad in their offering. We have gone for depth, and I mean, we have scale. There are more people playing game online than there are people in Iceland, which is kind of a milestone for somebody that comes from Iceland like myself. We made a game that's bigger than our country, and now we're here in the UK, and it's kind of 60 million, so that's probably a good
next target.
A good next target.
Okay.
But there's a lot to learn from those. I mean, Roblox does a really good way of just having a set of games which are unified mostly by a community and a mildly on an economy front. At least there's a shared currency concept, and there's a shared identity, and there's shared community. And they go very far with that. And when I look at what we're, for example, doing with Even Dust, there was a lot of gameplay connectivity. You actually could shoot a missile from EVE Online, from a spaceship in space, and it landed on a map on a PlayStation 3 when somebody called in an airstrike. And that was mind-bogglingly cool.
At the time, pioneering,
It's the coolest thing I've ever seen, and anybody has ever seen. But the actual practical gameplay of that was a lot of EVE players waiting around planets, waiting for Dust players to ask for a game strike, like an airstrike coming from space. So it wasn't maybe the best gameplay. It was conceptually super cool. It made for awesome trailers, but the moment-to-moment experience was not the greatest. So these are the kind of things you learn by just kind of putting them out there and seeing what comes back. So and you can take a lot of inspiration from, for example, Roblox, that creates this sense of a multi-product metaverse without creating kind of cross gameplay between different Roblox experiences. But we still want to take it a little deeper than that. But like I said, we've sometimes taken it a little too deep, and I think Fortnite and Roblox definitely have shown us you can do a lot with more basic
more basic and a bigger audience. But I mean, you must look at those games and think, oh, we could do this but better, right? Is that?
No, not really. I mean, it's like well, I could say that Fortnite kind of comes out of nowhere. I mean, even Epic themselves have
Yeah.
said that it was a game that was struggling. They did a pivot, and voila, now you have the biggest game in the universe. But Roblox, they've been at it for a long time. I mean, I've been following Roblox for the longest time, talking about it with people in the industry, and people are largely unaware about what's going on in Roblox. But coming from the background of VRML technologies and whatnot from the 90s, I mean, Roblox is very close to what a lot of the discussion back then were about.
Yeah,
and, like, kudos to them. They've done an amazing job.
And it's another great engaged community. You know, all of that content is actually made by them. It's I
have a 9-year-old son, and oh my god, looking at the games that he plays, he is well, he still does a bit of Minecraft, but it's mostly Roblox.
Yeah, it's a similar household here, and you know, we had one of the co-creators of Sharkbite on in the festival earlier in the week, and that's there's only a couple of them. That game's had almost 1 billion plays over a couple of years on Roblox. It's got a bigger audience than some of the big franchises that we talk about in the industry. So, you know, that's a whole other. It's almost a whole other culture and a whole other world, right? So this is where we're at with this, you know, these different universes. And you've talked about Roblox and Fortnite, and you know, as one of the things I should say is that I've been skeptical about this phrase metaverse, because I look at it and I go, these things have existed since forever, right? You know, there's lots of examples from outside of games where we've been making metaverses, right, in different universes.
Yeah, you could absolutely say that, but I think what is like a difference from an EVE Online to maybe D&D campaign is the persistency. I think what we at least focus on, and what we think the value of EVE Online is in this discussion, has to do with the persistency and the economy. When millions of people can come together and build something together that has lasting power for decades, that is something that is different than what we had before. I don't think you can draw comparables from various other forms of games that people have played. People have been playing games before there were computers, but I think the difference is the persistency aspect. Like in EVE Online, everything in there is built by players. Not all the star bases, but all of the spaceships, all of the massive fleet fights with tens of thousands of people coming and fighting and destroying spaceships worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is all like somebody sweated to build these things. Right. And I think that is where the distinction is from what you could see from others. Like, sure, we had that back in kind of MUD days where you had that in text, but at MUD was a few hundred people. Like in EVE Online, you have hundreds of thousands of people which are building something, and in Roblox you have millions of people building something together. So I think that is where the energy kind of accumulates, and that is the persistency aspect.
Right, that's really interesting, because I think that's that thing where if you look at these things, you go, well, online games have been around for ages. We've had a metaverse forever, but actually, like you say, you know, a D&D game is a single shard of a game that then it's closed once it's done.
Yeah, right? Exactly, and nobody can join into it flexibly. It's mostly the people starting the campaign have to finish the campaign. When the campaign is over, it's over. I mean, sure, you can run a campaign that goes on for a very long time, but it is not like a persistent entity that exists without the dungeon master and the players. In EVE Online, like, it exists, it goes on. Like, it goes on whether anybody at CCP is working. I mean, it just exists. And
So because it's that's what's interesting, I think, and that's what captivates people about this topic now, and investors, and, you know, as a catch-all phrase, because we're talking about, you know, for years we've been making these virtual worlds in video games, but now they're running in parallel to our real lives, and, you know, there's ways it connects with, like you were saying, that kind of that wonderful description you made of the bubble that sits between these reality and then a lowercase v virtual reality. And I wanted to kind of talk through with you some of the areas where this intersects, and because I think that, you know, you mentioned esports, but there's other topics where, you know, games have been flashpoints for certain technologies or certain cultural elements, and I think it's just really interesting for us to talk about, because, you know, So, for instance, Eve is a massive, like you say, a big economy of itself. So what could we expect from the way a virtual economy in Eve or another game intersects with the real economies in the real world?
Yeah. So in 2008, we hired an economist to answer these kind of questions for us. And I remember when I hired him, it's like I told him something like this. I think what we have is something like an economy, and we need you to kind of test that for us.
Yeah.
He goes, he plays him online, looks at the community, looks at our data and whatnot, and he comes back a month later and says, well, it's not like an economy. It is an economy. Like, your economy is just as real as the economy of Iceland.
Yeah.
Because what people don't really fully appreciate, unless you're an economist, is that economies are statistical measurements of human behavior. They don't really exist. To do consumer price inflation, you just have to go and check the prices and ask the people. It isn't like a real thing. It's a meta concept. I mean, in Iceland, there's a database in the central bank that has all the money in Iceland that has not been printed out as paper, which is very little. And if you look at that database and the EVE Online database, they're basically functionally the same.
Wow.
And we made the point a bit sort of coyly. We call the currency in EVE Online interstellar credits, or ISK, which is the same as the currency in Iceland. And there are more people that use our ISK than the country ISK. Our ISK is more exchangeable for real world goods in other countries than the ISK. You cannot take an ISK bill and go to downtown London to a bar and buy a beer. It's just not accepted. But for sure, you can be in an EVE FanFest in London, which often happens, and you can pay with ISK, the space money, to get a beer there. So we have run these kind of, I mean, it sounds a little cute, but and it is cute, but it's also like pretty fundamental. This money is no more or less real than the money in the real world, especially when there is no correlation or redemption of the money we have on planet Earth now. Once it was taken off the gold foot, there's no redemption on the dollar bill. It just says, "In God we trust." It's basically just based on the common belief that that dollar is a dollar.
Yeah.
And the money in EVE Online is just the same. And this obviously has been proven so well with Bitcoin, where people have been trading Bitcoin for a decade, more than a decade, and it's just accepted that it has value, even if it has no value other than there are only going to be 21 million of it. That's the only value. It's just scarcity. And the same applies to the money in EVE Online. And people have been trading the money in EVE Online, mostly not. We don't allow it because the legal framework around it is not very mature. But ever since the game came out, people have been buying and trading the money of EVE Online for money on planet Earth, mostly on eBay in the beginning, and now on various sort of real money trading sites. And I wish we will come, well, I don't wish for it. We're just going to come up with a way for it to happen in a more compliant way with the laws and regulations and taxations and all these elements you have to factor in. And ultimately, my dream, at least for EVE Online, is that the EVE players that have played this game for decades and will continue on, they can do so feeding their family and building their retirement while they play the game.
Wow. I mean, we're getting into some pretty, big conversations here about like the value and the meaning of money. But I think it's, you talk about being able to take your currency from a game to buy a beer at a fan event. It's a great thing. Do you think how long until I could run an EVE business and buy myself a car, a house, a book, something bigger than a pint?
So people have done this. Like there was a guy who founded a bank in 2009, ran a huge bank called the E-Bank.
Okay.
And he actually, like many people that run banks, ran away with the money. And since it's not really against the law, it's against the terms and usage of EVE Online. So we banned him.
You can launch a missile from another game onto no. I'm getting my
but it's not really illegal to bankrupt your virtual bank in a space game, and it shouldn't be. It should be illegal on planet Earth, but not in space or in EVE Online, and he went to university with the money, so it paid for his university education. But I think this notion that people are making a living for playing games is not as outlandish as it was maybe a decade ago. And now the top streamers make more money than most people that work on making computer games. So here are concretely computer game players making more money than people that are making games. Same with like esports teams. They make a lot of money.
So like how esports and Metaverse works together, because that you mentioned it earlier, but let's talk about that.
But in EVE Online, people are making spaceships and selling them, and they make space money from that. And there should be a way to make a framework where that could just be your job. You can just, I mean, EVE Online needs a little more scale, not a lot, but again, if Iceland can work with 300,000 people, EVE Online can certainly work at like 500,000 MAU. But we need more frameworks around it, and it's actually going back to Bitcoin. There's a lot of inspiration you can take from how cryptocurrencies and blockchain assets have been framed in the law and in the taxation system, and it's actually those elements are trailblazing a lot of frameworks which computer games can adopt, whether we end up using a blockchain or not. Certainly it has become a lot mature how these are classified in the different economies around the world. And I mean, we've been at this for 18 years. We're planning to be in this for decades more. And by the end of it, we will come up with a good way where you can play online, feed your family, and build your retirement.
Wow. And actually, so just slight side point then, I wanted to ask you about obviously we all saw it in the short squeeze on GameStop stock. What happened with EVE last year? There was a similar story, right? Or recently in the last few months, I can't remember.
Yeah, so this has happened many times in EVE. Like you can, there's not a formal shorting mechanism, but you can just short the old school way, where you just borrow like a type of mineral or spaceships and whatnot, and you sell them, and then you promise to return them later, betting on the market is going to go down. And there was an opportunity for that earlier last year because of some of the changes we're doing to the mineral distribution. Then people were predicting that the price of titanium, which is one of the core minerals in EVE Online, was going to skyrocket. And some people did not believe it's going to skyrocket. So some people were hoarding it, and some people were borrowing it from people that were hoarding it and promising to return it. And now a year later, the titanium is actually, it went sky high, and now it's, I think, slightly under what it was when the frenzy was happening. And there are many stories behind the scenes of people shorting and being squeezed out of it and whatnot. But the game does not offer a robust enough system to implement short squeezes through kind of derivative contracts and things like that. It's definitely something we could do, and certainly inspired by GameStop. It's something that obviously gamers want to engage in. And we have the environment for that. We actually used to allow you to trade on a margin, but we had to close that because it was exploited in various different ways, like trading on margin can be. And it was easier to close it at the time rather than to build a holistic framework around shorting and margin trading, etc. But these are all elements we have on the backlog of things to do in EVE Online as the timeline progresses.
You must see things like the GameStop story, and it's kind of pairing with what the EVE stock story, and something, I mentioned buying it. I said, "Oh, can I buy a thing?" You went, "Actually, somebody did that 11 years ago." So it feels like these metaverse experiences are also actually quite a good way to explore things that haven't happened in the real world yet, and kind of define, experiment almost. So a way to predict what's to come. Is that fair?
Yes, that is absolutely fair. And it used to be like that. Things used to happen in EVE Online before they happened in the real world. Now the real world is giving us a run for our money. It's like
Did you have a pandemic patch at all, or?
Well, I mean, as per the GameStop example, I mean, this is science fiction. Like a community on Reddit is is busting Wall Street hedge funds. Like this should be happening in EVE Online, and when we look at this, it's like, okay, we got to step up our game. Reality is catching up.
We've talked, so we talked a lot about the commerce side of it. I wanted to talk about the kind of the player experience, players' identities and things. Because obviously we talked, you went back to the kind of the story with Eve, where you said almost the community secondary. Actually, the human experience is almost what matters most in these. So, kind of, what's your take on what the metaverse sort of opportunity, or this new genre we're kind of defining, what it means to people who go into games, and what their identity is in one world and how they transfer it to another?
Yeah, so we also studied this a bit, and there is something about belonging to more than one context, which is obviously very uniquely human. Like, we can understand what an actor on stage is. Like, like monkeys don't do theater. They do a lot of cool things, but they don't do theater. Like, they just that abstraction is uniquely human. So if it's uniquely human and it's something only we can do, it probably is something we should do more of. And and this ability to belong to more than one context, which is obviously something that happens just in everyday life. You're in a different social network at work than in your family and with your friends, etc. But when you add this dimension that you're living this extremely engaging life and relationships through something like EVE Online, it gives you a more human dimension, not less. And we have found people attribute that, like playing EVE Online makes them more social, not less. So for all this talk about like games being a negative thing in people's lives, and of course experiences vary. It's you get everything under the sun when you have such a broad concept as games overall, and even in EVE Online. But largely, I think from talking to EVE players at various sort of gatherings over the decades, it is genuinely a positive thing in their lives. It has had a positive effect in giving them more dimensions to their persona and more dimensions to their relationships. So rather than it taking away from reality, like people do a lot of things in reality which are not like maybe super productive. And I often take like watching TV, which it doesn't really give you another dimension. Like it's mostly you're consuming, you're not actively participating, you're not building your social network, you're not building new relationships, you're just really kind of turning your brain off and going in consumption mode, which is also valid and needs to happen. Also, our brains sometimes need a break, but that is not what is happening in experiences like EVE. And I've actually thought a lot about this, and it's really what makes it different is that when you're playing a game like EVE, you're making decisions, and you're making a decision. I'm gonna buy this spaceship and not that spaceship. I'm gonna make a decision. I'm gonna take this risk. I'm gonna buy these minerals and hold them and sell them later on. And every time you make a decision, it's either good or bad, and from that you learn. Yeah. When you're watching TV or even reading a book, then you're not really making a decision. Well, yeah, that's what else's business. Yeah, right. I mean, when we're making a decision watching TV, it's about channel surfing, and I actually think that's why you do so much of it. Like if you're somewhere in front of a TV with old school channels, you're always channel surfing, because that's the only way to interact and make a decision. Otherwise, you're just extremely passive and trapped in the experience being offered. So there is something magical about games overall, that you're making decisions, and I think that's why they're so engaging. And I think that is one of the reasons why people attribute so much personal growth from playing EVE Online is because just making decisions makes you grow. So having failure, doing the wrong thing, just helps you build up the resilience against the anxiety that would build up if you're not making decisions.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really important note. Whether it's Eve or Candy Crush, I think it's an important note to make clear that the word I was going to say, you said it first, that the resilience players get from digital experiences, interactive, is beyond something you engage with passively, and I think that's why all these different metaverses we're hearing of are rising in popularity. I should say, if whoever's watching on YouTube or on our Deal Room platform, if you've got questions, ping them into the chat. They'll get sent over to me and I can put them to Hilmar. We've had one or two come through already. But I was going to just to go back to that point about the player resilience. It's creating, all of this is now creating like a generation and willing participants in these metaverses, right? So there's kind of there's a bigger addressable audience for experiences you make and experiences everyone else makes, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, games have come such a long way in this regard. And I think, 2020 in many ways has helped people understand how much engagement you can create through virtual means. When everyone is attending schools through Zoom and it goes on for a whole year, you gain an appreciation for how much can be achieved from afar. And then also just a lot of people have turned to computer games for connecting with others and managing anxiety and just having an outlet for boredom, which there was plenty of that going around last year. And I think net computer games came out with a clean bill of health from last year. They really were a net positive into that situation. Yeah. And I think that opened a lot of people's minds to what they're then doing when this is not the context. Because like I said earlier, I can genuinely say there are just so many people that have come to me over the years, just genuinely thanking for what EVE Online has brought to them.
That's amazing. It must be very, it's rewarding and useful for you, right? Because this is you're doing this all the time. You're building a new experience or a new extension of that world. And it's like, it must be a really good moment for someone that runs a games business that people are ready and people understand what that kind of digital life means, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it gives you a sense of purpose. And I've seen it in the company itself as we have progressed over the decades. There was a period of time, maybe 10 years ago, where there was a bit of a sort of an identity crisis. Is this a good thing? Is this a worthwhile pursuit? Are we a net benefit in the world? And I think now I see, and we survey that. We survey every year we do a big employee survey, sort of measuring how people are doing and what they care about. And the sense of purpose has been increasing as the years go on. And we were always wondering, we had a pretty low sense of purpose, like I said, 10 years ago.
Yeah. And
a lot of that, I think, had to do with the fact that you're not really convinced that what you were doing was a meaningful pursuit in terms of bettering mankind. But I can now just, it's obviously in my interest to say it. I'm a CEO of a company where my job is also almost to do it. But I don't know. There's been a shift where it doesn't feel like such a stretch. There's just so many anecdotal stories. There's so many examples. There's so many testimonials. And for every year that EVE adds, you get more of those. That I think a lot of people can just say with absolute pride, it's just EVE Online is a net benefit in the world.
Yeah, and I echo what you say. Actually, in many ways, Games London runs an accelerator. All those new companies have talked about their purpose and understanding why they make something with gameplay in it to satisfy and to kind of nourish people. It's not just I'm making a cynical game to release. It's I'm doing this because I'm an artist and I believe in it and I want to engage with other people. So I think that's definitely the moment that I think games companies are now living into, and it's, it brings responsibilities. You've got big audiences, you have to be responsible about, playtime and all those other messages that we get criticized for. But like you say, companies have got momentum.
Yep.
And so what I wanted to kind of, before I kind of look at some of the viewer questions, was just talk about, the metaverse beyond some of those things, and this is phrased, are you ready? The metaverse is coming, are you ready? So let's kind of talk about what everyone else can do in this place. Who's the metaverse? Is it something that someone can create? Is it already exist? We've established they already exist, metaverses, but what's the next phase of this? How does it look, and what's the opportunity for for both of yourselves and other companies?
Yeah, I think there are sort of various dimensions to it. I think there is a social dimension. I think there's an identity dimension. I think there's an economy dimension. There's an immersion and gameplay dimension. So there's so many things you can pick from. Mm-hmm. I think when it comes to Eve, our kind of niche in this regard has to do something with the persistency, with the economy, and with the social network around the game. I think that is kind of the strengths of EVE Online. We have improvements to make when it comes to the actual interaction model. EVE Online was made 20 years ago. It's made for modems. The target platform was 33.6 kilobaud modems. So the game operates on a 1 second tick rate, which makes it kind of more point and click than dogfighting and things like that. Yeah. And some of the scale of the environments, for example, the asteroid fields. We don't have like an Oort cloud or a Kubernetes belt or like Saturn, rings of Saturn and things like that. So we have a lot of kind of work to do in the environments. Yeah, so I think there is such a rich field to explore. If you look at some of the elements which are happening in blockchain games, mm-hmm. which are obviously extremely made about economical concepts, I see some of the sharpest sort of economy game design happening in blockchain games because they're so constrained in what they can do, because everything's so expensive and hard when you're doing it in an open distributed ledger, that it's fascinating to see what people come up with. And then when they kind of go and tap into all this sort of decentralized finance that's going on, and well, the whole NFT bubble is another fascinating realm. Like the concept of NFTs has existed in MMOs for a very long time.
That's right.
Yeah, just because they now exist in a more, well, is it more accessible? I don't know whether it's more accessible. It's quite inaccessible in a way, at least to understand it for people. But it certainly, you can go on a website and buy something and you feel like you own it. And this is something that MMOs have been doing for decades. But there's something about the accessibility or the fantasy generation that they've been able to do on that front, which I think is a lot to learn from for games, because like I said, these core concepts have existed in games in a very long time.
Yeah,
we have our NFTs in EVE Online. They're called singletons, which is definitely something we can build on. Like in this regard, ownership matters so much to people. So there's just so many avenues you can take it, and there's so much. And then on the other side, the tools to make games have improved so vastly. Now we have Unreal and Unity, which it took us 3 years to make the engine to make EVE Online. Wow, now you don't have to do that anymore. You can just get an engine off the shelf. Then you have all the cloud solutions and all the backend infrastructure with AWS and Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure. Like once you have an engine for your front end and a server architecture for a back end, you're half the way there. This took us decades to perfect in EVE Online, and now it's commodities off the shelf. So it's making a new game today. Like what a time to be alive.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously you make it sound easy, but at the same time, you have to if you're going to create this kind of experience, right? You need to we need to go back to some of that stuff you were talking about before, and like, you know, the good tools of the metaverse might be the technology, but it's also the people, right? It's this player engagement. It's making people feel satisfied. So, you know, you mentioned NFTs, which people are very, very cynical about, and things like blockchain, but ultimately people want to go to those spaces wherever they exist to feel rewarded, right?
Yeah,
like emotionally.
Absolutely. I mean, Second Life was selling art way before there were NFT arts on blockchains. But what is it that make it take off over there like it has, and not as much in Second Life? Was Second Life just so ahead of its time? Maybe it's that. Maybe the timeline is now catching up. I certainly have come to appreciate how much ahead of its time EVE Online was. We were for the longest time just thinking we would have to make a new game because we would just be made obsolete, but just hasn't happened. There's
the 5 years turned into 18, right? And 18.
There's nothing really come out. I mean, there are things like Fortnite and Roblox which have taken the scale, but they've not taken the scale from existing games. They've just increased the size of the market. So I guess it's never been easier to make a game, but it's probably never been harder to make a hit game. But that's probably the environment we live in, because it's so easy to make a game. Then there are so many games made, and then like once in a while you get something like Valheim that comes out. I think it's 4 guys, 4 years made that early access, and voila, they selling millions of copies. And I mean, that's a true testament to the time we live in. That I don't think would have been possible 10 years ago, not to this scale and quality. It's amazingly high quality.
And that's it. These, you know, the games that seem to catch on in a big scale now are those ones that offer this, you know, this other world to go to and stay for, you know, for a while, forever, you know. I could quickly just go to one of the audience questions we've had, and I think this is, I mean, this is quite slightly technical one. I think this is an Eve fan or Eve player, but and I guess it's interesting. Has interesting implication for the metaverse, to how people behave in it. So he's saying, this is Thomas, who's a freelance game dev. He asks, with Eve, have you ever had plans to allow users to automate gameplay further than what is currently allowed? And I guess you can answer that, but also it's that suggests to me some issues with, you know, responsibilities in the metaverse. Can you manipulate it to suit what you might get out of into the real world?
Yeah, so it is very interesting, this concept in Eve, because it touches on 2 concepts we have in reality. So one is we fear that robots are going to take our jobs in reality. And this is a question about that in Eve. To mine in EVE Online, you have to sit in front of your computer and make actions to take minerals from an asteroid and put it in your cargo hold. That is something you can, with some craftiness, automate. And then you have a robot taking legitimate jobs from people that otherwise would be making a profit mining, because it's not a human mining, it's a robot mining. So that's one aspect which touches on a similar thing in reality. Then, because we were talking about blockchains before, is some of blockchains are validated through a concept called proof of work. Is that you have to prove that you did a certain amount of work, and we are going to believe that because it's costly to do the work, and thus you are most likely not cheating. And Bitcoin has a very elegant model on this. That's why it has existed as it does, is that unless you have the majority of people doing the work in Bitcoin, it's practically impossible to cheat. So in a way, when a human is mining in EVE Online, we are looking for proof that somebody actually did work. And if a robot does the work, then there are 2 problems. Well, it's not really work when a robot is doing it, at least not in the sense of the economy foundations of Eve. And it probably means that we have to change the gameplay of mining such that it's not so easy for robots to do the mining. You need to have humans doing it. So the challenge in this question is, we do appreciate that people want passive income in EVE Online. They would like to build autonomous processes that give them yield and income over time. And I think the onus is on us to come up with better ways for people to do that, other than break the terms of service of the game. But we also need to do it such that the mining in EVE Online is more humanly engaging and has more of a mastery to it, so that it isn't so easy to cheat the proof of work, which is proving that you actually mined those minerals. It was not the robot that did it for you. So as you can see, like, running EVE Online is a little bit like crosses a lot over to current day affairs, what people are concerned about in what they call the real world economies. We struggle with these elements on a daily basis in EVE.
Wow. Well, thank you, Thomas, for your question. It actually became much more relevant to the topic than I anticipated. We are just about out of time. I wanted to just say thank you to Hilmar for joining us. Hilmar, where can people find you online and find out more about CCP?
Well, you can go to ccpgames.com, our website. You can go to eveonline.com, where you can find EVE Online. I'm Hilmar Veigar on Twitter. So yeah, we are all over the metaverse of the internet. Easy to get in touch.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, that was a fascinating conversation. Do stick around for other broadcasts on our YouTube channel and check through our past videos of the games we've showcased previously this week. Thanks again for joining us, Hilmar.
Thank you.